Hello, there's so much being discussed at the moment on social media about boys and masculinity and social media and the influence of the internet that I just find it easier to go on here and make a video and give you my opinion on things. I mean, I've got an 18-year-old boy and of course I've got kind of strong opinions on this because first of all, because I have a son, I think I've thought about this so much and tried my best to guide him through this world that was also affected by COVID. So anything that had to do with screen time just went out the window, and he was 14 years old when it happened. So any control I thought I had before then just went. And one of the hardest things with screen times is you just can't take it back. It would be such an argument to get it back that I wasn't willing to have that kind of fight. But I did realise that if I wanted my voice to be the one that's strongest in my son's mind, I had to be very present to make sure of that. Because if it's not our voice in our children's head, then it will be their mates and the internet. We know that the internet is endless and scary and dangerous, while it can also be great and give them so much knowledge. And we also know that their friends are not mature enough, and children themselves or teenagers in between childhood and adulthood, and that they have no unconditional love like we do have. They have no life experience. They don't necessarily have resilience. So it was very clear for me that I wanted my voice to be the strongest in my son's head when he was making decisions. And I've tried all along to just do that. I always parent from a point of view, how did I want to be parented? My upbringing was extremely religious, no sex before marriage, really quite extreme. And I hated the fact that my needs never mattered. My opinion didn't matter. It had to be the way my parents wanted me to live and to be, which was not nice and affected me for a very long time. So the way I parented was a lot of the opposite. I wanted my kids to be listened to or felt like they were listened to. I wanted my kids to feel like they can make their own decisions about their life, and that I trust them. Of course, trust is not easy said. It's easy said, but it's really hard to have trust, because as parents, we always from the moment go are in that fear element that something could happen. And that is just a constant, and we can't really get rid of it in that sense, but we can work on being aware of it and trying to be in a place of non-judgment, which we can only be if we are not in a place of fear. So for me, I have to constantly remind myself that when I react or I'm very reactive, that is my fear talking. It's not actually the perfect parenting like I would like it to be. And what is with screen times, I was having conversations from a very young age with my son about all kinds of things, you know, sex, drugs, anything like that. And that might not be everyone's cup of tea, and I respect that. Everyone is different. You have to do what works for you. So I can only talk about what worked for me. So I had very early on books like Let's Talk About Sex, so my son could ask questions. And also I think if kids are younger, when they learn about it, they don't understand that actually means what it says, you know. But when they get to preteens, then learning about what sex is about can be quite scary, because they're not supposed to find that attractive or good in any way. So they hear something that we think is pleasure, but for them should be really off-putting, because a 9-year-old or 10-year-old should not find that interesting, because they're still children. So they really should not be interested in that. I find it easier to talk about to talk about it like you talk about the bees, but in real terms when they're much younger. And I remember that from my daughter, she was 4 or 5 years old, and she was bluntly saying what happens when people have sex. And that was it. That's how babies are made. And there was no weirdness about it. So that's my opinion. Everyone is different. So please don't judge me on that, and go through what feels right for you. My sister was sitting between my parents at the age of like 12, and they're both telling her in their most repressed ways about sex. And that was the vision I had. I never wanted to give my children. I thought it was going to happen to me one day. And I was so glad it didn't, because it would have been so awful. So car journeys were always my go-to for conversation, uncomfortable conversations, but somehow it worked really well with my son. My daughter is much more closed off, and that's okay. I respect that. But my son was always very open about these conversations. And I would talk really quite blatantly about things, you know, about sex. First of all, I'll make clear that sex is a beautiful thing if it's done with the right people, right person, in a safe context, in a respectful context. That the first one is really important, and that really should be not at a party or, you know, out in the bushes. Like, I hear enough stories about these things, so I made it clear to my son that that's really important. And I kind of kept on saying that without putting pressure, but just saying, you know, my first son wasn't great, so I really wanted to have a good experience because it would shape you for a long time. So it's really important. And it was really nice to see the school was also very much onto the 16 is legal. I think it's important to be aware of that as well. But having these conversations, allowing him to understand what sex is about from an adult point of view, not from his mates, some who were not having relationships, some who were having quite shocking kind of constant changing relationships or one-night stands at that age. So I really wanted to give some guidelines, but I needed to be not judgmental. I needed to really be honest and open and not make him feel like I'm telling him what to do, but I was just giving suggestions. And I did the same with drugs. I never said don't do anything because my parents did that and I really hated that feeling. But I would say things like, you know, first of all, you're a teenager, your brain is developing. If you take anything, you know, it can really affect your brain. I know you want to do well in life. I mean, think about this. Also, I would say things like, I'm not going to be there when you have to make a decision what you want to put in your body. So if you have a pint or two, you know you're still alive the next day. You might have a hangover by your life, but if you take a pill, there's no guarantee. So just have a think about what you want to do and what you want to put in your body. But that conversation was happening before any parties. So he could make a picture in his mind. He could decide in his mind what kind of person he wanted to be. Or I would say to him, what helps you say no? I mean, if you're at a party, how... I know, because I know drugs are around. Don't kid yourself, they are around everywhere. But what helps you to say no? There is a bit of a suggestion there that he says no. But also what helps you to say no? And then he would say, oh, it's hard in smaller groups. It's easier in bigger groups. And then he'd found his way of dealing with it. You know, when he was offered a joint, he would pretend he's having a break so he didn't feel uncool, rather than saying, oh, I don't smoke. It's just little things to help them, guide them through it. And the same is with the internet, all the stuff that's been discussed at the minute. Our voice has to be the strongest. And you can, to a certain extent, control what your children are watching. But also I think we have to be realistic. Once they have a phone and they are, you know, they go to 12, 13, 14, we have no control over what they see. I mean, unless you are super strict and very clearly have no phone, then okay. But if your child has a phone, I find it impossible to control. So I knew then for me, what needed to happen was those conversations needed to go on and on and on. And it's simple things like we always have a meal together in the evening. There's a non-negotiable. I would often pretend I had to drive somewhere, so I had a chat in my kids in the car because I knew that were the best conversations. But everything comes out because when teenagers, yes, you know, they just have their moments. They have a week of not talking and suddenly at 11 o'clock, it all comes out. So my heart is full of just wanting to put out there that I think the most important thing are still these conversations. I think what happened in the last few weeks, those conversations can make us feel very disempowered and very shocked. And we can blame the outside world, of course, for having internet and for having social media. But let's face it, I'm here now using it and I'm as addicted as anyone else. We can blame our kids for using something that is so addictive that as adults also struggle with it. Or we can just say, I'm not having this. I'm the loudest voice in my child's head. And sometimes we have to fight for these conversations. Sometimes they are uncomfortable. And if we want our kids to sit through them, well, we have to do the same. My daughter is more closed off, so I will go and say, I know you like talking about this, but I really need to get this across. I really need to talk to you about this. You know, I do it in the car so she can't run away. She knows it by now. You know, that's where I think we need to keep that connection with our children. There's a really amazing book, Hold On To Your Kids, which talks about, by Gabor Mate, which talks about peer orientation. And it's that gradual process that's happened in the last 60, 70 years, and kind of our generation, or my generation, was the start of this, where our peers become more and more important, and the hierarchy, child, adult, has changed. And that he makes it very clear that children can only orient themselves to either the peers or the adult. And it's the phenomenon of kids who are not being held at home, not being connected, stuff happening, also our society, we move away from families, we have separated family, patchwork families, all these things, mums working. So there's no judgment on this, it's just a reality. That our kids, when they tend to go for peer orientation, that we lose that connection, and that is when things tend to go wrong, because again, like I said earlier, the peers are not mature, they're not no unconditional love. And if your peer becomes everything you have that you can hold on to when life is difficult, and they turn on you, then kids are totally lost. And that's a phenomenon we see with very young kids. I'm not going to go into details of this, but yeah, it's happening a lot. And so we need to grasp our power in the most beautiful sense of staying connected with our children, to not let that happen. Our voice has to be the strongest. Now, if we parent out of fear, we will do things that are not right for our children. They can sense it, they will run a mile. It's really hard not to be in the fear mode, but I had things like, my son would go to parties when he probably was 15, but he was 12 years old, starting secondary school, and I would go, oh my God, I know he's going to have drugs, he's going to be alcohol, what am I going to do? Panicking. And then I realised, this is in 3 years' time. It's like having a baby and worrying how he's going to ride down the hill. And I realised, let's just wait. If in 3 years' time there is still a need to worry about him, I can do that then. And actually, 3 years on, these conversations had been really good, and I trust my son, and he's quite open, so I didn't need to worry about these things. But we worked on that conversation, and sometimes I wouldn't know the answers. He asked me very open questions sometimes, and I would say, I don't know. I've never been the mum of a 15-year-old. You've never been a 15-year-old. Can we do this as a team? Can we work it out together? And can we make it happen? And you know what? That worked really well. And I think it was nice for him to see, oh, Mummy doesn't know everything. And she's not assuming she knows the truth of what I need. Because let's face it, I didn't grow up in these modern times. I mean, I don't know. We even have 25-year-olds saying we can't connect to 16-year-olds now because the world has already changed so much. So how can I assume that I understand what it's like to live in this world, social media and everything out there? I was also talking to a colleague who works in young male mental health. So coming back to the point of raising boys. And he was saying there's a massive difference in boys having girlfriends or partners for their mental health. And that's interesting because I see a lot of parents being really scared about the sex, or my kids shouldn't have sex, they should, can't watch porn. And it's interesting to see that relationships can be really good for these boys because, let's face it, girls are very touchy-feely, cuddly. When you see a group of girls that always hang together, they sit next to each other, they sit on each other, they're having cuddles, where boys don't get that anymore. So that can be a really important aspect. Of course, one-night stands is not going to give you any of that. This is proper relationships I'm talking about. But I see a lot of parents struggling with the fact that their kids might have sex at the age of 16, 17. Again, that's, I know, a conversation for you to have with your children, always aware of the legal age, of course. But I've been very open about this, especially with my background of being totally told I could never have a relationship until I was married. But I've been very open about this, but in a gradual way also. There is stages in relationships. You find someone that you really like, then you see if you build trust, and then you go further. But again, who is the loudest voice in your son's head? I wanted it to be mine, and it has worked well with my son. He had a girlfriend at 17, and we had really open conversations up till then. And now he doesn't have to tell me everything. I don't want to know everything, but I think the danger is that society takes away our power as parents, as mothers. And the conversations in the last few weeks feel a bit like this. Yes, there is a real danger out there, but don't underestimate the power you have in raising your children. And you probably, hopefully know this still. But that's really important to me to just reinforce that, you know, the struggle is real. You know, I struggle with my kids most days. You know, it's not like I go, oh, everything is perfect. But I have found my path in how I do it. I pick my fights. I understand the teenage brain, so I understand why they find me so annoying sometimes and can be quite rude and all the lazy stuff. So I choose my fights very wisely, and if it gets to a level of too much disrespect, I will remind them that I'm a human being as well, and that, you know, that was too far and I need an apology, etc. So I've got so much else I could talk about, but yeah, empowering our boys to be a great version of a man. There's nothing wrong with masculinity. There are some amazing, masculine, beautiful, respectful men out there. So I don't like the term toxic masculinity, because it's nothing wrong with being masculine, and let's not take that away from the boys, because they are confused enough about who to be and what to be and how to behave and what's good and what's right, because the schools are hammering that in a certain way. That's brilliant. But also sometimes I feel it's a bit extreme for the boys, that they're made to feel guilty for something they could potentially do. And I've seen this in my sons as well, in the conversations we had about stuff that's been talked about in the schools. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's trust ourselves that what we put in our children has been good, and that it goes in and they are watching on the sidelines. Even if we feel like they don't need us anymore as teenagers, that's not true. They need us to be that stable, loving self that we have been all these years. And yeah, their peers are really important, but, you know, we are so much more important still. And we need to be their solid ground, their place they come back to. They can be their awful, vile self, because that's their safe place. I know it's hard to see that sometimes, but I've really learned to understand that when kids come home and they're like awful moods, it's because they have held it in all day, because they needed to be liked, they needed to fit in, and when they come home, they trust you, they know they're safe, they know you still love them regardless of what, and they can just be themselves, and you will still love them afterwards. I know it's not easy. I have to often scream on the inside and roll my eyes walking away. But we are still super important to them. So I think we have the incredible chance of raising the next beautiful generation of boys and girls. We have such a power. We have so much knowledge. And yeah, let's not let anyone take that away from us, because we are still so important, even if it doesn't always feel like that. But the job you're doing every single day is just absolutely incredible, and it's super important. So I just wanted to jump on here and just remind you of that after Mother's Day yesterday. Please remember that you are, you know, you've done an incredible job already. Keep going, and yeah. It's gonna, I mean, 18 is now a nice age. I can see the fruit of my work, and that's beautiful. When they go towards 16, 17, often it calms down, and yeah. Okay, bye for now.